Chapter 20. Comprehension towards the broadcast. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 20. Comprehension towards the broadcast. 2. Jesse. So the day the broadcast starts is today. Joe Era. Appa, can't you at least call us? Send us a picture. Lucas. I believe you will also do well on the second phase. Joe Minjun smiled while looking at the accumulated messages on his cell phone. He was about to reply. Besides him was seated a young man. He had black skin and bulky arms and legs. It was Marco Denver who had come together from New York. Joe Minjun looked at him and Marco smiled awkwardly. A husky voice with a slightly high tone was heard. We are both from New York, right? I just don't have anyone to talk to. I'm not exactly a native. But I'm a participant that came from New York. Well, anyways, don't we know each other by face already? Marco asked cautiously. The fat youth that was over 190 cms tall to show such a timid attitude was quite a sight. Joe Minjun nodded. It could be said that they already knew each other. Although the atmosphere became awkward because of Kaya's and Amanda's fight, Marco opened his mouth. What did they ask you during the interview? I wonder. If I was confident on winning, who seems like a candidate to win? These things. There was no need to say that he was questioned whether he liked Kaya or not. Marco asked. Who do you think will win? Kaya Lotus. Joe Minjun didn't hesitate a moment and replied. Marco nodded as if he agreed. If you saw her cooking in New York, it is understandable to think like that. What do other people think about who will win? Well, I don't know as I still haven't interacted with them. Honestly, I think it is too early to determine who the winner will be. Joe Minjun nodded, but he was opposed to that opinion. Putting aside that he came from the future, Joe Minjun could see the cooking levels of the participants. And what Joe Minjun grasped right now, was that from the participants who remained, only 3 had level 7 cooking skills. Kaya Lotus, Anderson Rousseau, and Chloe Zhang. Chloe was half white and half Asian. Because of the influence from her Chinese mother nationalized American, she could show amazing dishes that other participants couldn't compare to. However, on Joe Minjun's memories, she was a participant that got disqualified quite early on. If that was not the case, his memories about Chloe couldn't be that foggy. Aside from them, they were all level 6. Was it coincidence, or their skills got spotted? There were no people who were level 5 that had survived until now. In the case of bakery it was different. They were mostly level 5 or 6. If not, they were lower than that. Excluding Anderson that was level 7, there was only another one that was at that level. And that was... What? Why are you looking at me like that? It was Marco. Joe Minjun looked at this timid Afro-American. It was just a thought he had, but nothing wrong was going to happen just because he was friends with Marco. If he thought about Grand Chef's team missions, it was better to be close to those participants that had skill. And aside from that, Joe Minjun liked people who knew how to cook. Baking and cooking were different specializations, but it was similar in being delicious. I would like to try your bread once. How did you know that I make bread? I'm just saying. You look like you make some good ones. Marco started to seriously think if he did look like someone who baked well. Joe Minjun stood from the place. Marco was looking at Joe Minjun with a dumbfounded expression. Joe Minjun opened his mouth. Let's go to the hall. The other people should be there as well. Marco put on a dumbfounded expression as if he didn't understand. Joe Minjun didn't get frustrated and calmly explained. It's time for the broadcasting. The participants were gathered in front of the TV in the hall. There weren't only the participants. Some of the staffs were also sitting there. Joe Minjun, along with Marco, sat in empty seats. The TV showed some advertisements and soon, appeared the initials of Grand Chef. Some cheers could be heard from the participants. What adorned the broadcast at the start was the presentation of the judges. Some people talked as if they already knew that was going to happen, and the participants' faces flashed by really quickly. Among them was also Jo Min-jun's face. Marco shook Jo Min-jun's shoulders as if he was amazed. "Min-jun. Did you see? You just came out." "Yeah, I saw." Jo Min-jun replied as if he was calm but, saying the truth, he was really excited because it was his first time going out on TV. He couldn't help but feel his heart thumping. Jo Min-jun concentrated on the screen. Probably, there weren't even half of the participants that remained that were shown. They had to have amazing stories or great skills. If they weren't any of that, they had to be a really odd character. The first one that appeared was Chloe Zhang. She, who was wearing a white qipao, was showing her signature menu. It was quobaru, mixed with basil. A sweet rice tangsuyuk. Just by looking at it you could tell that its light brown sauce was sticky, and because the tangsuyuk and the sauce were fried at the same time, the sauce could be seen as it was seeped in the fry. Emily put a tangsuyuk on her mouth, and as if it was hot, she was blowing air through her mouth. But even that seemed as if she was enjoying it. Because it was fried, the crunchy sound couldn't be transmitted clearly, but the crunchy sound of chewing sauce patted with basil together with fresh onions was really pleasant. No one, without exception, could take their eyes off the screen. Of course, what happened after that was that she passed. Looking at Chloe being hugged by her mother, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but feel jealous unconsciously. It would be great if his parents could be together with him. However, it was a useless thing. It was true that his parents wanted him to have stability. For the eldest son to embark on the road of cooking without any visions and dedicate his life to it, was something they could only get preoccupied. Jo Min-jun, frustrated, let out a sigh. It seemed as if many of the participants were now alert of Chloe, because whispering sounds could be heard among them. Jo Min-jun chewed his tongue and looked at that sight. It was something pointless. If someone else did good or not, if they got disqualified or not was something that depended on their own cooking skills. For them to check on her like that. The TV showed a participant entering that wasn't even on the broadcasting place. 16 years old. A white girl that didn't even lose her baby fat cooked a tenderloin steak. The results were of course, disqualified. At that moment, in the TV sounded the voice of the narrator. Even in this season are a lot of young challengers. Look at this participant. Jo Min-jun. He's an Asian challenger that crossed the world from the other side believing in his passion of Grand Chef. Jo Min-jun looked up. The screen was showing the image of Jo Min-jun. Precisely speaking, it was Jo Min-jun roasting the bream. The scene where he was making the bell pepper sauce was short, but after that, showed a zoomed-in face of Jo Min-jun and his voice came in. There is only one reason I came all the way here from Korea. I want to confirm myself if I'm someone who has the qualifications to cook. Those were words he once said in an interview. The roasted bream with bell pepper sauce showed on the screen, and Jo Min-jun's voice rang again. For me, Grand Chef is a charming competition. It would be good if I'm able to show my cooking skills until the end. The next was the judging. When he looked at the appearance the judges had when eating his bream, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but feel a bit awkward. Looking at himself trying to be calm when he was clearly nervous, even if it was his face, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and frustrated. When some of the participants gasped of admiration, his embarrassment grew even bigger. The judging continued. It was just like Jo Min-jun had heard. In the middle of the judging that by the way wasn't bad, Jo Min-jun felt more confused. Why would they put someone who wasn't special at all put on the broadcast? Was a participant that came from the other side of the world that charming? As he was thinking that, there were stealthy stares looking at him. The participants glanced time by time and conversed between them. Jo Min-jun barely endured letting out a sigh. He didn't have that much of a skill, but they pointlessly made him attract more attention. However, just by showing his face on a broadcast was reason enough to attract attention. Because, from all those participants, the casting director chose to put him on the broadcast. Just by not making any remarkable mistakes, the probabilities of Joe Minjun to survive got higher. But Minjun, you didn't appear for a little while, but they properly showed you. I also wanted to appear. Marco was looking at Joe Minjun with really envious eyes. Looking at his eyes, he felt that all of his complications disappeared. Joe Minjun smiled and said, "Now that I think about it, I also wanted to appear in TV screen at least once. It seems that one of my wishes came true. Ugh. I will also appear in it." It was at that moment when he was looking at the resolved Marco making a smile. Joe Minjun's eyes contacted with Anderson's that was looking at them. And at that moment, he frowned. The look Anderson was giving him wasn't kind at all. It wasn't a particularly hostile look. However, that menacing look got to Joe Minjun's nerves. Is it my unconsciousness? He didn't particularly clash with Anderson, so there was no reason for him to hate him that much. But he didn't really like the look he was giving him. Joe Minjun's gaze grew sharp. Anderson turned his attention to the TV. It was really funny to tell him something because of a moment's look. So the only thing Joe Minjun could do was looking at the TV like Anderson. And at that moment, Joe Minjun started to concentrate without blinking. What showed on the screen was Kaya. A scene where she was helping her mother selling fruits in the market could be seen for a moment, and then it showed Kaya's image when cooking. It was her grilled eel. Looking at the grilling eel covered with oil and soy sauce was spectacular even though he had already seen it before. Joe Minjun could confidently say that the eel's body was more beautiful than the Niagara waterfall. And it was the same for all of the participants. Everyone looked at her cooking dumbfoundedly. Those were people who knew how to criticize a dish. They could vaguely taste the flavor just by looking at the preparations of the dish. And they could even notice Kaya's ability. To perfectly grill an eel at the age of 18 was something impossible without having been born with ability. Similar as before, but a somewhat different atmosphere could be sensed from the participants. It was sure that they were alert of Kaya. It was an ability and skills that made you do so. But at the same time, they were feeling their body weak as never before. To be only 18 and have that kind of skill. On top of that, she didn't even receive elite training. Her ability was one that made other people want to have it and feel jealousy to just be watching it. It was an ability they never had before, but they all felt a sense of loss. Joe Minjun understood those participants. Because even he, the first time he saw Kaya's video, felt admiration and jealousy. Joe Minjun suddenly turned to look at Marco's expression, but he let out a laugh unconsciously. Marco didn't seem to have an interest in Kaya's skills. It was as if he wanted to eat the eel on the screen, but he was observing with his mouth wide open. He was rather timid, but he wasn't normal either. Joe Minjun didn't hate Marco. Do you want to eat it? Huh, what? What did you say? If you want to eat it. That eel. Of course. If I could leave delicious food my body wouldn't have become like this. Marco talked like that and patted his belly. Joe Minjun opened his mouth. Sometimes, we would also be able to do that. That dish. That sense of taste. The day will come when we get those. Maybe we already have them. At Marco's answer, Joe Minjun looked dumbfoundedly at him. When their gazes met, it was as if Marco got frightened but replied without confidence. Ah, no. I heard that saying on TV. It's not that the sense of taste appears, but the forgotten sense reappears. And the asleep sense of taste revives instead of your skill getting better. Gosh, I don't even know what I'm saying. Leave it at that. Just forget it. No. Those were good words. Joe Minjun replied like that and he looked at the screen again. The praises of the judges were pouring from the judges. This. I'm surprised. This is the best dish I have tried in New York. No, the best I have eaten in this season. For someone that isn't even in her 20s to skillfully grill eel like this isn't a normal person. It seems that you were gifted with many skills by God. It was a compliment that wasn't even surprising. The participants looked at the TV. Jo Min-jun turned his head to look at Kaya. She was leaning on a wall of the hall and was watching the TV with a look you couldn't know what she was thinking about. No, she was almost staring. Kaya looked back at Jo Min-jun. She had always been able to sense the sights directed at her like a ghost. Kaya made words with her lips. He was now quite accustomed to that word. What are you looking at? Jo Min-jun too replied that way. Saying the truth, it didn't have any meaning. So Kaya must have had a headache trying to interpret what his lips had said. He thought it was a childish revenge and was at that moment he turned to look at the TV again. Jo Min-jun was being shown on the screen. Jo Min-jun's face became slightly contorted. Why in the world did he appear on Kaya's scene? The question didn't last long. The Jo Min-jun inside the screen opened his mouth and said. She's the best participant from those who has come today. The best from all the ones I've seen. And maybe, she will be the best from this competition. Saying that she will be the best from this competition means that you think that she's going to win. At the question of the PD Martin, Jo Min-jun replied. It will be so if there are no upsets. Comprehension towards the broadcast, 2, End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 21. Comprehension towards the broadcast, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 21. Comprehension towards the broadcast, 3, HM. Those were some unconventional words. Marco whispered in a low voice. What Marco said was what all the other participants agreed with. Because saying that Kaya was going to win was the same as saying that all the others were going to get disqualified. Jo Min-jun let out a sigh. He felt as if he had just said something he shouldn't, and he thought that if there was any need to insert a scene like that. However, he could also understand. Making that kind of genius more popular in that way, in the perspective of the viewers, it was funnier and more serious. Probably, Martin didn't even take into account that what Jo Min-jun had just said could bother the other participants that watched the broadcast. No, there was a high probability that he couldn't think about it. Either way, there was no point in discuss it, now that the situation turned out like this. The really important thing was the stares directed at him. Not everyone was looking at him, but most of them that had a light attitude sent not too amiable gazes. He felt sour. Jo Min-jun averted his sight to not make eye contact with anyone. But from all of the places he could look, he had to look at Kaya. She was glaring at him as if she didn't like him. Jo Min-jun felt all the more depressed. If he had a sin, it was just that he praised her, but for even her to be like that. But he wasn't in a situation where he could question that. With Jo Min-jun's sentence, the first episode ended. It was an ending that showed Kaya's genius skills, but in the hall, only a quiet atmosphere remained. Am I going to get bullied? For a foreigner to say that early on, there was no way they would view him favorably. At least Marco, who was next to him, wouldn't hate him, but the participants that were gathered in the hall started to get up and leave the place. And Jo Min-jun could hear some discontent voices from those who had left. Jo Min-jun was letting a sigh when someone got in front of him. Jo Min-jun lifted his head. He was handsome and had noble blonde hair. It was Anderson. He said with a displeased voice. I'm curious. If you have the skills to judge all of us. As Jo Min-jun couldn't reply anything back and was just looking at him, Anderson whispered to Jo Min-jun's ear. I'm begging you, but please don't make something trashy. Because I'm going to get angry. After saying that, Anderson left. Marco didn't know what to do and just patted Jo Min-jun's shoulders. Don, don't mind. They will soon forget it. I wonder. I don't think I'm going to. The one who replied to Marco wasn't Jo Minjun. It was Kaya. She was glaring at Jo Minjun with her displeased face. Kaya opened her mouth. What are you? What do you mean? I'm a participant. No, I'm not talking about that. Why are you suddenly using another's name and claiming that I'll win? Because of you only I got bad-mouthed. It was understandable for her to say that. They all admitted Kaya's ability, but they didn't publicize it. However, Jo Minjun's interview became that switch. The winner candidate that possesses frightening abilities, Kaya Lotus. That concept became established in just a moment. Kaya couldn't help but feel bothered. It wasn't even her mistake while talking, but she became like that with another's interview. Jo Minjun usually treated her favorably, but that was that and this was this. Facing Kaya's ferocious glare, Jo Minjun opened his mouth. I'm sorry. Why don't you just act presumptuously with a hard face? That way I can curse you all I want. If you want to curse me, you can. Because today I put you in a really bad situation. At what he said, Kaya looked at Jo Minjun for a long while, and in the end let out a deep sigh. Enough. Even if I did that, I would only become the bad girl. Now I can't even get angry in this situation. Aside from that, I'm saying this right now, but what I said at the interview was the truth. You are going to win this season. If there aren't any upsets. Jo Minjun's words were filled with affirmation. Because he wasn't predicting but already knew the truth, it was obvious. Jo Minjun knew the future. The future where all the participants get disqualified. That none of the participants right now can beat Kaya. However. And I plan to become that upset. However, Jo Minjun didn't lose to her yet. His cooking level wasn't a problem. There wasn't a need for him to be afraid of her. Because they didn't face each other yet. Because it was like that, Jo Minjun was the only participant who could face Kaya. He believed that. He wanted to believe like that. He didn't want to cook already thinking that he was going to lose in the upcoming fights. He wanted to hold the hope that it was all for the sake of winning, and fought believing in his cooking. Jo Minjun wanted to do so. No, he had to. Do as you wish. Be an upset or not. Kaya talked like that, and left the hall grumbling. Jo Minjun just looked at the back of Kaya leaving. Looking at those two arguing like that, Marco went towards Jo Minjun and poked him with his index finger and asked. Lovers quarrel. It's nothing like that. Chat, Tiny Young. Did you see Grand Chef? I think I saw that girl Kaya somewhere. Abdul N. They say she works in the market. Maybe you saw her once while on the market. Also, she looks like there was at least one girl in college similar to her. Isn't that right? Cersei Lannister. I don't like Tyrion from the participants. He looks like I want to pick on him. George Margin. He looked fine to me. Eve Rose. Talking about not liking someone. There was also that girl Kaya. When I kept looking at the screen I got more and more scared. Devi Jones. At Eve Rose she must just be wary of her surroundings. Won't you get nervous getting on air at a young age? Golden Rosemary. I'm not that interested in cooking so I can't say much, but in my opinion, that Korean did the best. I wonder why people just talk about that Kaya. Christine R. Just looking at the appearance seems like Minjun made the best dish. The one who made the most difficult dish was Kaya with her grilled eel. I didn't know there would be a teen cooking with a grill on that level. Evil Empire. Shout. Kaya. That guy Minjun said something good. I will also say some words. Anyways, the winner is Kaya. Troll troll. You can't know that on a short period of time. But only this once I'll agree. Aside from her skills I want to see Kaya winning. I want to become her fan. No, maybe I already am. Taylor Love. Minjun's bream is certainly charming. Chloe's quobaru was also good. But I wonder about the eel. Because I haven't eaten it even once. I'm not attracted to it. What I want to eat the most is Minjun's cooking. Aside from cooking, he's sexy. Jo Minjun read all the articles left on the SNS, social network service. As soon as the broadcast ended, many articles related to Grand Chef were being posted. At times, a smile could be seen from him, but at others, he frowned. But after some time, Jo Minjun's face became expressionless. To react at each one, there were just too many to do so. There were just too many for him to get happy or sad. At times, there were criticisms without reason, no, they were curses. And there were viewers that showed unexpected affection. At times Korean-Americans, and at times, native Koreans referred to him. Irina Choi. Personally, saying that Kaya is already the winner was rushing it. Her dish was excellent, but to already conclude like that was not good. Is he saying that he is not confident or doesn't have the courage to win? Helena Vodianova. I agree. It may be the work of the editing, but he didn't look confident. At this point, Jo Minjun couldn't help but to accept it. That what he said at that time was a mistake. Was it because he already knew the future and said that? No, perhaps that was merely boasting. Just as someone who boasts about his great father, was it that he wanted to boast about Kaya winning as her fan? Because Jo Minjun was a fan of the chef Kaya. Because he wanted to become like her. It could be said that he was pleased by her skills and accomplishments. However, this was a time he couldn't let it end by just being pleased. He couldn't misunderstand Kaya's greatness as his. Because he was also standing in the same stage as her. To not fall behind, he had to have the resolution to surpass her. He couldn't just become part of the audience who just looked at her abilities and her cooking. He wanted to grab pens in the same field as her. He wanted to do so. To claim that Kaya was going to win was indeed rushing things. He couldn't think it through. It could be said that he was thinking things through, but the end result was this. And only then could Jo Minjun realize that this wasn't a school, nor the kitchen the 30-years-old Jo Minjun used to work. This was Grand Chef. A broadcast. It was a place where everybody would remember a word he said. It wasn't that the strength had left him. It was regret for saying something like that at that time. If he was a participant, he couldn't just casually say that the winner was already decided. That was something only the audience could say. And Jo Minjun wasn't a viewer right now. There could no longer be defeats. Jo Minjun's gaze grew sharp. Jo Minjun wrote an article. Of course, through a nickname. Cooking Man. A chef should only talk through with his dishes. Comprehension towards the broadcast, 3, End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 22. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 22. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 1, the mission this time will be a team 1. The participants' whispering voices could be heard at Joseph's voice that reverberated through the room. Jo Minjun shut his mouth and listened at Joseph's voice. He knew that it was going to be a team mission. And he even knew the theme. The theme is simple. Make a 3-person team. You will have to cook an appetizer, main dish and dessert. Assign among yourselves what you are going to cook. You need to cook according to your specializations, but remember. This is a team mission. Course meal. Although it was the simplest 3-course. But the point of having to balance the overall of the 3 dishes was going to be really hard. And if you have to cook with people you have never worked together with, then even more so. Jo Minjun ched. For it to be a team mission just after he got out of a doghouse. He already knew it, but it wasn't that good of a situation. You will have to decide the teammates for yourselves. But there is something you should remember. The role you should take on should be only one. I recommend you making the teams according to the division of the roles. Just as Joseph finished speaking, the participants looked at each other. The first one he looked for was Marco. He didn't show it yet, but Marco's bakery level was 7. If he were to make dessert, then he would probably make it better than anyone else. He was thinking like that and approaching Marco when, next to Marco was already another person. And looking at that person's face, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but get surprised. An unexpected person was standing there. Chloe Young. Ah, Min-jun. Marco smiled brightly and called for Jo Min-jun. Jo Min-jun started to walk slowly. As he glanced at Chloe, Marco opened his mouth. You saw yesterday's broadcast, right? This is Chloe Young. Chloe, this is Jo Min-jun. Hello. Mr. Famous. Hello. At Chloe's greetings, Jo Min-jun replied with an awkward face. Marco smiled and opened his mouth. I was just talking with Chloe about the team. Min-jun, what about you? I would like to team up with you. It's fine for me, but, Jo Min-jun said that and looked at Chloe. She said while smiling. I'm also fine. I saw you cooking the bream on yesterday's broadcast. It was quite fun. If you saw it like that, then thank you. Your cooking was also good. Tangsuyuk. Chloe smiled brightly without saying anything. Even though she saw yesterday's broadcast, she didn't want to prejudice him, so Jo Min-jun too became calmer. Chloe said with a soft voice. Then, are we a team? I suppose so. Have you thought of the part you want to take care of? I hope that our ideas don't overlap. Jo Min-jun said that and looked at Marco, saying the truth, it was obvious what Marco was going to choose. His baking level was a whooping level 7. It was a level you couldn't achieve without hard work and dedication. And indeed, Marco said what he was expecting to. I want to be in charge of the dessert. It's my specialty making bread or cakes. Okay. Min-jun, what about you? I would like to make the appetizer. Then I'm in charge of the main dish. Is that what you wanted? I can do both appetizer and main dish. It only doesn't have to be dessert. Listening to Chloe, Jo Min-jun looked at his surroundings. Kaya could be seen. She was in the middle of conversing with Anderson. Were they going to team up here? He didn't remember well. Jo Min-jun turned his head. It wasn't the time to pay attention to them. What theme are we going with? Well. It's rather difficult now that there are only 3 courses. Jo Min-jun empathized with her. It was more comfortable to follow precise directions. It was quite a difficult job to take into account the harmony of the 3 dishes and configure the menu accordingly. If my cooking level goes up, would I be able to see the course's arrangement level? He couldn't know. But in the first place, he wondered if he would even need the systems counseling when he reached level 8 on cooking. But of course, to reach that level you would need experience and hard work that couldn't even be compared to right now. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. As I see it, I think it would be better to go with quality rather than flashiness. It isn't the time to be adventuring right now. I also think so. First, let's go to the pantry. While they were leaving to the pantry, Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. What are you planning to make for the main dish? According on how was the main dish, the appetizer and the dessert couldn't help but change according to it. Chloe thought for a while and replied soon. I want to go with pan-fried scallops. Pan-fried scallops. It was a dish where scallops replaced meat. It was a bit different to what he had thought, but he didn't oppose to it. He could only believe on Chloe's cooking skills. Chloe looked at Jo Min-jun. What are you going to make for the appetizer? Soft fried tofu. Will it suit before presenting the scallops? I think it will be good. What about you, Marco? At Chloe's question, Marco seemed to be baffled. Seeing that he was rolling his eyes seemed like he had many things to choose from. After a while Marco opened his mouth and replied. Mocha biscuit. I was thinking about putting some whipping cream on top, but would that be too heavy? Yeah, it's a bit heavy. Wouldn't plain yogurt or something of the sort be better than whipping cream? To have a simpler flavor. With a refreshing flavor. Okay. I'll do so. Marco laughed sophisticatedly and nodded. Chloe clapped lightly and said. Now, we finished arranging the menu, now the only thing left is cooking. How did you end up talking with Chloe? It's nothing special or the sort. As she was told to make a team, she came to me first. Yeah. Jo Min-jun was talking in a low voice with Marco in front of the countertop. It was nice to meet Chloe, who had appeared so suddenly and at the same time, it was unexpected. Because they didn't have any contact before. Well, there would be nothing weird to say that it was a coincidence. There were only 27 participants, and for Chloe to approach Marco was nothing special. It was just unexpected. For one of the 3 participants with the highest cooking level to team up with the 2 of them. Originally, who would she have picked for her team? He couldn't help but think that. However, he didn't remember. Chloe, in the past Grand Chef, wasn't a participant who got too much attention. By the way, they got really picky with the rules. Before they started cooking, the judges explained the rules. The participants were only allowed to work in their own dishes. Saying the truth, this team mission was close to being masked as an individual mission. Currently, there were 3 countertops placed in the room. It was unavoidable because there were 9 teams. It was a method that judged 3 teams at a time. And during that time, the remaining 6 teams had to get to the second floor and observe the other teams cooking. Jo Min-jun's team was the first. He didn't know if he was fortunate or not. He personally thought that it was better. Because he wouldn't have to get nervous watching at the other teams cooking. Jo Min-jun glanced at the table next to them. Kaya and Anderson were standing still and preparing for cooking. Remembering the scene of Kaya getting mad at him, only made him feel sour. Let's concentrate on cooking. Jo Min-jun brought up the recipe for the soft fried tofu in his head. The estimated cooking score is 7. The recipe was perfect. At least, it was at Jo Min-jun's level. It was also a dish he had made many times before. He personally liked tofu the most, and liked soft tofu secondly. The first one was tofu in kimchi jjigae. That was sitting for a day. Saying the truth, it was a dish that couldn't be easily made at home. If you oiled a pan thinly and put the soft tofu, its flavor wouldn't be properly brought up. After squeezing the moisture of the tofu, you smeared it on dough, and when put in hot oil, the color became whiter and it looked better. But in this place, he could use however much oil he wanted to. Thinking that he would be able to properly cook got him flustered up without concerning the test. Jo Min-jun looked at the judges' mouths. One of them started to slowly open his mouth. It was Joseph. Start your cooking. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 1, end translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 23. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 23. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 2, the first thing Jo Min-jun grabbed was the cooking oil. He poured a lot of it in the pot and turned on the fire. Bringing up the heat of the oil wasn't something that was done in an instant. You had to prepare it beforehand, and that was also true for water. Jo Min-jun put another pot next to the oiled one, put some kelp and turned on the fire. There were 4 gas burners on the countertop, and Jo Min-jun was responsible for 2 of these. The other 2 were for Chloe. And for Marco didn't need a burner. While heating the water and oil, Jo Min-jun prepared the soft tofu quickly. He wouldn't be late if he prepared the soy sauce and the vegetables later. If it was an ingredient that needed to be fermented, then that was another story. But for soft tofu, it was more important for it to have a neat flavor. The size of the tofu wasn't big. In the first place, it wasn't good to have a big amount in an appetizer menu. Precisely speaking, it wasn't good for the overall course of the menu. People have a tendency to see the restaurant's dish amount and are reluctant to spend money on it. Zhou Minjun could understand them. Because, a restaurant's price was as much as 5 times the normal price. But the amount of food in the plate was the size of a fist, no, the size of a thumb, so it wasn't rare for people to complain about it. Aren't they saving too much ingredients? He thought. But the restaurants didn't put a small amount on the plate to save ingredient fees. Regret. That regret was the work of the flavor. And if you put a big amount of food, or ate many times the same food, feeling the same impression as the first time was difficult. Dishes with small amounts of food look to impress the customers. I'll make it a bite size. The knife sliced the tofu softly. The flavor and the regret came only with the size of a bite. There were even restaurants that served the steak already chopped in the size of a bite. He put the sliced tofus on top of the cotton cloth. For the soon-to-fry tofu to still have moisture was a great mistake. And when you buried the tofu in the dough, it had a high possibility to break. It was a must to remove the moisture of the tofu. At the same time, it was quite a pain of a job. If you put it over a dry cloth, the surface of the tofu would stick to it. And if you did it with a wet cloth, the moisture didn't absorb well. He had to use a not too dry nor a wet cloth like he was doing right now. That was the best method for the soft tofu not to turn bad and remove the moisture. Zhou Minjun grabbed the kitchen towel and covered the soft tofu with it. And after taking a breath, looked at his surroundings. Marco was making dough for the biscuit for quite a while, and Chloe was putting the sliced scallops in the steamer. He wanted to look at Kaya's table, but he purposely endured. It wasn't the time to pay attention to another's cooking. Zhou Minjun immediately grabbed the soy. Saying the truth, soft fried tofu was from Japanese cuisine. Agedashi tofu. What Zhou Minjun was making right now was an improved version of that agedashi tofu. Actually, saying that it was improved was a bit embarrassing. Because he was just using the agedashi tofu as the base and slightly changed the sauce. Zhou Minjun turned off the boiling water and put the katsuobushi. So far, there was nothing different with the normal sauce recipe. Even putting filtered gravy in the sieve and putting a spoon of soy was the same. However, that was where Zhou Minjun's change was. Lime juice. It wasn't too much. The amount was so low as to make one wonder if it would fill a spoon. But that lime juice would revive the sour flavor of the agedashi tofu. And after that, it was entirely facing victory. Zhou Minjun looked at the soft tofu sharply. The cotton cloth and the kitchen towel were already wet. It also meant that the moisture of the soft tofu got out. Zhou Minjun, after pouring starch, slowly put down the soft tofu on top. It was quite a sensitive situation. If he put a little bit of strength, the tofu would break entirely. Fortunately, he succeeded putting it on top of the starch, but it was too early to feel relieved. Zhou Minjun even held his breath and rolled a soft tofu the size of a dice on the starch. If it was left even a little longer, the starch's stickiness and the moisture left on the tofu could break it. Was it luck? Or was it his delicate touch? The soft tofu didn't break and could safely wear the starch coat. Zhou Minjun caught his breath and looked at the boiling oil. The soft tofus that were being fried in the oil seemed rather cute. He wondered that he would get this feeling when looking at a newborn. When it got a white color, Zhou Minjun quickly took out the soft tofu out of the oil. A voice could be heard next to him. Minjun. You are doing fine, right? Don't worry. It's perfect. Zhou Minjun replied simply at Marco's question. Looking at the white fry made him satisfied. While the soft tofu was removing the oil, Zhou Minjun prepared the vegetables. For now, it was the radish. He started to grate it with the grater and put it in the soy sauce, and then sliced the green onions. That was the end. Jo Min-jun silently observed at Marco and Chloe. He wanted to help them, but couldn't because of the rules. Jo Min-jun endured wanting to help them and observed the cooking of the both. Now that he thought about it, it has been a while since he observed someone cooking like this. When he was working at the restaurant as the youngest, he only cut ingredients in a corner, he couldn't see someone handling the pan that much. Marco put the biscuit dough in the oven, and now was preparing the yogurt ice cream to put over it. Saying the truth, it wasn't fun watching all of the baking processes. That was the reason Jo Min-jun started to observe Chloe. She was shaking the scallions, vegetables and a red sauce in the wok. At times, flames arose. On the countertop, there were a total of 9 dishes being cooked, but Chloe's pan-fried scallions aroma was particularly strong. Perhaps it would be able to get 8 points. It wasn't impossible getting that kind of thought. At least, its appearance and the aroma seemed almost perfect. And after some time passed, Jo Min-jun could tell that he wasn't wrong. Jo Min-jun looked with a face that had nothing more to admire at Chloe's dish. Pan-fried scallions, freshness. 92% origins. Too many ingredients to know, quality. High, average ingredients, cooking score. 8 out of 10. It was the first time he had seen an 8-point dish after Kaya's grilled eel. Jo Min-jun could feel his mouth watering. Even admiration voices could be heard from the participants on the second floor. He, who was observing right next to Chloe, could tell that it was no ordinary dish. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. Don't you need to taste it? I don't. Do you want to eat? Chloe looked mockingly. Jo Min-jun couldn't even feel that he was being mocked and nodded. That was just how charming her dish was. Chloe used chopsticks to put a scallop and bok choy in a steel spoon. And then held it out to Jo Min-jun. Its appearance was perfect. The scallop that was fried with a red chili oil could be seen that it had knife marks on it, and the green color of the bok choy seemed to make the scallop's fierceness more humble. And even after it entered his mouth, it was the same. From the spaces between the knife markings on the scallion, could be seen some oyster sauce and chili oil, and its flavor was tasty and heavy. Usually Jo Min-jun didn't like the combination of salty and sweet flavor. But even he couldn't help but be amazed. The scallops had a sea aroma left, but it was suitable. It didn't smell fishy and it contained a beautiful flavor inside it. And the bok choy wasn't placed just because so. The leaves stimulated a soft feeling to the tongue, and each time he chewed the crunchy stem, the unique and clean juice flowed out and washed his mouth. The strong flavor of the pan-fried scallops was being eased with just one bok choy leaf. It even made him amazed. So at the same time, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but be surprised. If she had lost to Kaya, it was understandable. But when there were at least 10 participants left and the winner was almost confirmed, Chloe wasn't on that place in Jo Min-jun's memories. What could have happened? It was a problem he didn't have to think right now. Even if he thought about it, he wouldn't get any answers. So Jo Min-jun turned his head to look at the soft tofu. For now, the oil should have drained. The given time was almost over. He had to start moving the soft tofu to the sauce. Soft fried tofu. Precisely speaking, while finishing the agedashi tofu, Jo Min-jun felt something he didn't know. At first, he thought it was the scallop he had eaten, but it wasn't. And that feeling soon appeared before him. Agedashi tofu, freshness. 90% origins. Too many ingredients to know, quality. High, average ingredients, cooking score. 7 out of 10. 7 points. Usually, he thought that it was good enough. He thought that it was a relatively safe score. However, looking at that score, he didn't feel as satisfied as usual. He remembered Kaya's eel. And also remembered the scallop he had just eaten. Zhou Minjun lifted a spoon and put a soft fried tofu in his mouth. It was good. The feeling of it touching the tongue, the oily flavor of the fried coat, and beyond that was the bland flavor of the tofu. However, he wasn't satisfied. Was the flavor lacking? Or could it be because of the score before him? If he didn't see the score, would he be satisfied? 3 dishes and 1 meal, 2, end translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 24. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 24. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 3, time is over. Hands off the plate. Alan shouted sharply. Zhou Minjun looked calmly at Alan. Alan looked at all 9 participants and said, I'll evaluate each team separately. Chloe, Minjun, Marco, bring your dish over here. Zhou Minjun grabbed the plate that contained the soft fried tofu and walked to where Alan was. The 3 plates were placed. Emily looked at the dishes and confusedly opened her mouth. A Japanese fried tofu, along with Chinese fried scallops, and on top of that, biscuits. It feels as if various cultures are mixed. But would they suit each other? The one who replied to that was Chloe. She had a smile that anyone who looked at her would have a good impression towards her, and said, I think it will. Just like our team. We are all from different cultures but are harmonious. I hope so. After finishing her words, Emily split the tofu. The fried coating was stick to the tofu, so even while splitting it, it didn't seem like it will crumble. With just that, Emily seemed half satisfied. At least, she was with the tofu. The spoon was filled with the soy sauce, and on top of that was placed the soft fried tofu. Emily, with an elegant snap, put the tofu in her mouth. While chewing it, Emily could know that it was well made. She didn't feel even a little bit of oil from the tofu juices. The soy sauce felt lighter because of the lime juice, and even while eating the tofu, she felt like she was eating salad. It was a great appetizer. At least, it was if it was an amateur that had made it. Emily savored the tofu. Saying the truth, if you made tofu well, it would be delicious. But bringing it flavor wasn't an easy task. With that meaning, there were no points to correct Zhou Minjun's agedashi tofu. It wasn't anything special, but its flavor was faithful to the basics. Emily evaluated like that. And that was the same thinking Joseph and Alan had. They felt unease because lime juice was put in it, but because it was used moderately, it didn't worsen the flavor, but became its aroma. Joseph started to think the thing he had thought many times before. That Zhou Minjun was a genius regarding on making the concept of the recipes. But it couldn't be called outstanding. However, when transforming a recipe, there were times that it worsened or became better. However, Zhou Minjun kept the basic flavor of the dish and made it better. Could it be that at this young age he understood the construction of flavor? It wasn't weird for Joseph to think like that. Joseph, wondering, opened his mouth. Minjun. Who thought of putting in lime juice? It's something I came up with myself. And you have actually tried it? Yes. Is that weird? Joseph didn't reply and kept his mouth shut. It didn't look like Zhou Minjun was lying. It meant that he did come up with that idea. And the same could be said for all of the dishes he had made before. For him to be able to do that, he would have cooked a lot. But was that something possible? He was only in his early 20s. Even if he lived in the kitchen, it was difficult to cook that way. Joseph, who didn't know about the system's help, could obviously question that. However, he couldn't just keep thinking about it. Right at this moment, the food was getting cold, and Emily and Alan had already put a scallop in their mouths. He couldn't do anything about it and ate a scallop. It was delicious. Basically, it's already a delicious dish. But the soy sauce's softness and clean flavor felt all the more delicious after going through the throat. Their tongues, that were more sensitive than usual, could sense clearly the salty and sweet flavor of the chili oil and oyster sauce, and the softness of the scallop seemed to kiss his tongue. It was a beautiful flavor. And it was harmonious. Joseph calmed himself and savored the flavor left in his mouth. Even after he became one of the best chefs in the world, his heart remained a pure one. What brought him to become a chef? To eat something delicious, and to want to make it. That's why Joseph couldn't help but be moved by the scallops. And Emily and Alan were the same. Of course, there were some differences among them, but their impressions were softer than usual. The last thing was the mocha biscuit. What was placed on top of the square mocha biscuit was a slightly frosted plain yogurt like a round marble ball. The mocha biscuit entered their mouths. The crunchiness, along with the spreading coffee aroma and the sour flavor of the yogurt, made the mouth feel good. It was a dish you couldn't make without understanding the role of desserts. Even if the judges tried to be expressionless, they couldn't help but leak a smile. Because delicious things made people smile. Jo Min-jun looked at the smile of the judges. And he felt relieved. Marco's mocha biscuit was 7 points. Thinking about Marco's level 7 in bakery, although it wasn't a failure, you couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Aside of the cooking score, he didn't have confidence in the harmony of the dishes. The tasting continued. The judges went towards Kaya's team course meal. Kaya was in charge of the appetizer. It was a salmon tataki that only the exterior was roasted along with a salad with sour sauce. Jo Min-jun frowned. Salmon tataki salad, freshness. 92% origins. Too many ingredients to know, quality. High, average ingredients, cooking score. 8 points. It was an excellent dish like Kaya. However, Jo Min-jun couldn't have a good impression towards that dish. And the judges would also be like that. Is that the appetizer? Yes. Rather than appetizer, it is more of an entree. It's too heavy. I feel like that just by watching it. Alan was expressing exactly what Jo Min-jun was thinking. Precisely speaking, it was what everyone was thinking. Perhaps it would be better if she had made salmon sushi. But for it to be a hot tataki. That was too heavy for it to be an appetizer. Kaya looked at Alan without saying anything. In the end, Anderson couldn't endure anymore and opened his mouth. I'm sorry. Actually, enough. I heard from the director. You fought for the spot of the main dish. It's good for you to fight. But do you have to influence the dish because of that? Alan was looking at Anderson, but his words were also directed at Kaya. Kaya frowned a little and glared at Alan. She said with her low and husky voice. At least eat it. It will be delicious. When listening to Kaya's angry voice, only then could Jo Min-jun understand the situation. When the winner candidates Anderson and Kaya formed a team, the results were disaster. The reason was simple. The dessert was in charge another participant, but Anderson and Kaya were arguing about who would be cooking the main dish. The results of that was Anderson making the main dish. But after that, Kaya's dish was the problem. She made the same salmon tataki as an appetizer. You couldn't know if it was because she lacked understanding about appetizers, or because she felt resentment towards Anderson. But the results were what was showing right now. I can't eat this dish. I think that the other judges are thinking the same thing as me. Alan talked like that and looked at Emily and Joseph. The both of them were silent and just nodded. Joseph said, lamenting. Kaya, why did you cook this dish? You are someone who understands cooking. And that also means that you understand the fun of eating. This. I can't say that this is the entirety. I can't even judge the taste. Rather than disappointment, it is despair. How could this? Joseph couldn't even end what he was saying and let out a sigh. Jo Min-jun just looked at that sight. Those were some really harsh words to say in front of an 8-point dish, but Jo Min-jun understood them. It was just like Joseph had said. That dish got diverted from the theme. It didn't have consideration for the one eating it, nor was made sincerely. It was a dish filled with selfishness and rage because the main dish was taken. And only then could Jo Min-jun understand. Even if Kaya was a genius, she was still an 18-year-old girl. That she was still an ugly duck that had yet to grow to become a swan, she was still a girl who couldn't even control her own emotions. Silence filled the room. Jo Min-jun just stared at the salmon tataki salad Kaya had made. 8 points. A dish that was difficult to let it go. But at the same time, a dish that no one could place a hand on. This. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 3, end translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 25. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 25. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 4, it wasn't a proper dish. Jo Min-jun thought like that. Even if a lot of skill was used in it, it was something that should never have been in a plate. A dish that was filled with the chef's resentment, even if its score was high, it wasn't worth anything. We won't eat this. Go back to your places. Alan said, determined. It wasn't only directed to Kaya, but to the whole team. Anderson was holding the dish with a clear angry face. Kaya bit her lips and went towards her dish. And then ate her salmon. At that sight, nobody could tell her something and just looked at her. Kaya, after chewing it, gulped it. Then opened her mouth. She seemed calm, but her voice was trembling. But it's delicious, thought the meaning it held was just that. She took her plate and turned back. The sight of her biting her lips, to Jo Min-jun somehow seemed that she was trying not to shed tears. However, Kaya didn't have any rights to cry. Jo Min-jun thought. When a chef prioritizes her emotions and pride instead of the customer, you couldn't describe what was put on the dish with any words. The basics of course cooking was in the harmony. The appetizer had the role to show up the main dish and to appetize one's mouth. However, Kaya's selfishness didn't simply end at appetizing. Because it was her selfishness that made her cook the salmon tataki. It wasn't a coarse cooking dish, but an absolutely individual dish. But that was not having consideration toward the customer. Even if she knew it or not, it wasn't something to just let it pass. The judges started to evaluate the dishes as if nothing had happened. After showing an expressionless face, they went up back to the stage. But the evaluation didn't start right now. Only after the 6 teams that couldn't show off their dishes showed theirs, Alan opened his mouth. Chloe. Min-jun. Marco. Come to the front. As the 3 of them came up, only then did Alan open his mouth. It was an expressionless and hard face as always. The flavor was okay. It could be seen that you chose the menu considering that it was a course meal. Scallops after tofu, and then biscuits. It was a menu that didn't seem to suit each other, but unexpectedly, the flavor left on the mouth was good. Thank you. Chloe and Min-jun almost simultaneously opened their mouths. And Marco glanced sideways and opened his mouth late. Thank you. Joseph, who was looking at Marco, opened his mouth. Perhaps, the one who showed the most potential on this dish was you. Marco chefs tend to put something more to their dishes and to make it more splendid. However, your mocha biscuit didn't have any excessive flavor. It was a flavor that covered the scallops and the tofu's flavor. Also, the biscuit dough was perfect. You put in a deep and refined flavor and aroma in a simple dish. Thank you. Ah, thank you. Marco replied while sniffing. Jo Min-jun glanced a little and saw that Marco's eyes were teary. He was a tender child unlike his hog-like appearance. Jo Min-jun lifted his hand and patted Marco's back. Emily smiled and opened her mouth. I also ate it deliciously. Aside from the dishes, I think it was good to see you being nice to each other. I think you showed how a chef has to act when they form a team. You did well. Go to the second floor. You passed. They should have already expected that they had passed with what they were being told, but as soon as Alan finished what he was saying, Chloe let a happy scream and held Marco and Jo Min-jun. Of course, to wrap Marco's big body, her arms were not enough. In the end, Marco and Jo Min-jun had to receive her putting their arms around their shoulders while jumping. Jo Min-jun smiled awkwardly. He knew that it was an attitude to have after passing, but to be this cheerful. As he didn't jump and was only smiling, Chloe's face reddened and shook off her apron. However, that cheerful time didn't last long. Because next was Kaya's evaluation. Alan said coldly. It was a voice that his rage could clearly be felt. Personally, I put my expectations too high for this team. And the disappointment is also that big. I think that there's no meaning to fight over the main seat. But well, let's get over that. Because anyone would want to be the protagonist. But what comes next sucks even more. I think that there's no need for you to ask about it. Nobody replied. Joseph let out a sigh and said. A dish contains a chef's heart. Kaya. Your dish didn't contain a will towards the customer. Do you agree? Yes. Kaya replied hesitatingly. She seemed just like a child being lectured by a teacher. Emily opened her mouth. Her attitude was sharp and harsh, unlike usual. We didn't test your dishes. Because it's something we can't eat. So obviously, you are disqualified. Go back to your place. I have an objection. The one who opened his mouth was Anderson. Emily frowned as she looked at him. Anderson continued speaking. The one who ruined her cooking was Kaya, and it was her lonely action. Why must we be affected because of her? Do you think it's unfair? The one who replied wasn't Emily, but Alan. Anderson was elevating his tone while speaking, but forcefully repressed that and replied. Yes. I do. My mistake is wanting to take the main dish for me, and not knowing that she would act like a b*tch like that. Is that reason to be disqualified? It is. Alan replied shortly. He stared with his cold eyes. Alan went close to Anderson's nose, and spoke with a scary voice that would any time bite his face. Because you are a team. You talking like that right now means that you never considered yourselves to be a team. But this is a competition. Even if we became teammates, we can't act as real teams, can we? No. You can. If you weren't thinking about competition but instead cooked, you would be considering each other as teammates. A chef isn't a machine. It doesn't end just by dividing roles. Don't think that it ended just by presenting 3 dishes. The course is only one. It means that those 3 plates soon become 1 dish. After saying all that, Alan caught his breath. It was as if Anderson was repressed by Alan's overwhelming momentum, that he couldn't speak anything in reply. Alan slowly opened his mouth. It was a voice that got smaller as if he was whispering. Of course, I admit that you weren't lucky. You and Kaya were both outstanding. And your prides were also strong. It was as if there were 2 protagonists in a movie. But it only means that. If you can't overcome a situation where you are unlucky means that your ability only extends to that much. After presenting that sucking 3-course, did you think that only you would be able to get out of it? Anderson couldn't reply. Even when he was first talking to Kaya and making the team, his confidence was overflowing. He did fight for the seat of the main dish, but he wondered if just because of that they would be in this kind of situation. Was that his mistake? Anderson couldn't know the answer to that. His mind was yelling that it was not a mistake. He wanted to think that Alan's words were only that much. But the only thing Anderson could do was to keep his mouth shut. It wasn't because he was convinced. It was because even if he prolonged the talk, the judges wouldn't change their minds. The judging continued. 9 teams. Of those, the teams that survived were only 6. That meant that of the 3 teams, 9 people were going to be disqualified. Jo Min-jun just looked from the second floor. From the disqualified people that were gathered, Joseph was opening his mouth. You are now in front of the door to disqualify. I don't know how many of you would survive. But what I'm certain of, is that you are here because you presented a mess of a course. Lack of technique. Lack of teamworking skills. Either of which was it, the results would be the same. The disqualified people didn't reply. Some seemed like they would cry any moment. And some were sniffing. However, Joseph didn't hesitate. A chef put a mess in a plate. That was something that was inconceivable to a chef. Before revealing the theme of the mission, you have something to do. You have to select a partner right now. Only then will I reveal the theme. At Joseph's words, the participants moved from here to there and soon, started to partner up with the people next to them. Some teamed up with their original team, and those 2 had to awkwardly hold hands. But the disqualified people were 9 in total. So naturally, one had to be left out. It was Kaya. Nobody reached their hands to her. Because they had already seen her character in the course cooking. They wouldn't want to team up with someone that might bring trouble. On top of that, Kaya's skills weren't ordinary. If they were to team up with her, their dishes would rather lose light. Kaya looked at her surroundings looking nervous. And forced herself to sound confident and looked at Joseph. I don't care if I'm alone. I'm sorry, but that's impossible. Kaya, you have to choose from one from the passing candidates. Of course, your partner won't be affected by the results of this mission. At those words, Kaya looked up to the second floor. However, the passing candidates all evaded making eye contact. Even if they weren't going to get disqualified, they couldn't bear to be standing in that kind of place. Kaya, that was looking at the participants, stopped her sight at one place. Kaya, who was looking a long while at that face, said with her voice trembling. Help me. Jo Min-jun's face became rock hard. 3 dishes and 1 meal, 4, end translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 26. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 26. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, 1, the reason Kaya looked at Jo Min-jun and wanted him as a partner was simple. It couldn't be said that they were close, but it could be said that they had some sort of friendship. She didn't think about Jo Min-jun's skills or anything of the sort. She just needed someone she could be comfortable with. However, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but hesitate looking at Kaya. Jo Min-jun remembered the theme of the next mission. Foie gras. He did know how to make it, but it was something he had never made before. And it was also the same for Kaya. There was no way for someone from the ghetto to have cooked it. The reason Kaya could survive in the past was because the partner she had chosen was Chloe. Chloe knew how to make it and even had experience doing so. She was different to Jo Min-jun. Because of that, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but hesitate. Letting a hand in vain at that poor girl could rather get him results he hadn't expected. It meant that he didn't know if she would face disqualification that wasn't destined to happen. And that wasn't a simple disqualification. It was changing Kaya's life. He needed to refuse. He had to. It was for the sake of Kaya. He thought so. But in the next moment, Jo Min-jun was already getting downstairs. With each step he took, his head got filled with more and more confusion. Just why? This decision wasn't for the sake of anyone. Just acting like a good person could play and stake Kaya's life and the money she had earned. But he couldn't stop his steps. Jo Min-jun walked towards Kaya with a rigid face. Even if it was now, he wouldn't be late. He had to tell her that he wasn't confident. But the moment he looked at Kaya, he couldn't open his mouth. Joseph's voice could be heard. He was asking him right now. Minjun. Are you willing to be Kaya's partner? First, let me ask her something. Jo Minjun said that and looked at Kaya. Her sky-blue eyes was darker than usual. Jo Minjun talked with a voice a teacher had when he was teaching his student. It could be a mistake picking me. But are you sure you aren't going to regret it? I don't know. Kaya replied in a low voice. It was similar to a patient who had caught a cold. I just thought of you. To help me. If the situation was different, it would sound pretty romantic. But right now, it was only heard as depressed and dejected. Jo Minjun just looked at her. And opened as if he had decided something. The original future didn't matter. What was important right now was that Kaya asked him for help. The idol who he had always admired was asking for his help right now. Was it unavoidable to hold her hand? Okay. Let's do it. Thank you. Kaya replied without strength. Joseph, looking at them, clapped his hands. As everyone turned to look at him, he opened his mouth. As the team making is completed, now I'll announce the mission. Everyone go to your respective countertops and check the box put on top. Jo Minjun and Kaya went to the countertop that was farther away. An ice box the size of an apple box was in the place. Jo Minjun already knew what would be inside of it. Foie gras. Kaya opened the lid hurriedly. It was as he remembered. A frozen foie gras that was vacuum sealed was inside of the icebox. The disqualifying candidates all let out sighs. They could only do so. Because there wasn't a more difficult dish to handle than foie gras. The price was as expensive as the best meat, and if you couldn't cook it well it was comparable to just a meat chunk. Foie gras. The name was okay, but in the end, it was liver. And like every living being's liver, its disgusting aroma was strong. That aroma, perhaps even calling it aroma, was excessive. But to remove that smell and make it better was the main point of foie gras. I don't know how to do it. Next to him, Kaya mumbled anxiously. She was biting her lips to not express it, but it showed even more from her expression. Jo Minjun talked with a low voice. It was a voice that could calm your heart just by hearing it. I have never cooked it. No, wait. Don't make that face. We can do it. Kaya. You have cooked chicken liver or cow liver, right? Jo Minjun consoled Kaya. Kaya nodded with a nervous face. I have. But foie gras is a bit different. Even if it's different, it's still liver. Listen. It was at that moment when Jo Minjun wanted to continue speaking. Alan's voice sounded in the room. What's in front of you will be the theme for this mission. Foie gras. But you can't prepare it at the same time. You will have to change who cooks in intervals of 5 minutes, and while you have shifted, you are not permitted to help if not by talking. Anxious voices could be heard from the place. Even while excluding Jo Minjun and Kaya, there were still many people not accustomed to making foie gras. For people that weren't even pros to make foie gras and have experience doing so was very hard. Because it was not an ingredient that was easily handled. Only Anderson could have handled it. But on top of that you had to tag between yourselves, the difficulty of this mission would have risen to the top. We'll give you 20 minutes to think of the recipe. Decide in that time. And the time given to cook will be 60 minutes. Jo Minjun looked at Kaya. And opened his mouth. Let's roast it. It was brief, but Kaya understood. She had never cooked foie gras, but it wasn't that she had never heard of it. Because even she had studied the ingredients she had never handled before. There were 2 main ways to cook foie gras. The first was roasting, and the second was grating it with spices and making it as a pâté mousse. But realistically speaking, pâté wasn't an option Jo Minjun could choose right now. Because he, and also Kaya, didn't completely understand about foie gras. For a flavor they couldn't understand to mix it with different spices and making a pâté. It was obvious that a flavor worse than sausage that was sold in markets would come out instead. Kaya frowned. She understood why Jo Minjun chose that. But there was a mistake in that. It seems that you have forgotten, but this is frozen. I can't say much because I don't know about foie gras, but won't the flavor be lacking a bit? Nowadays freezing is done at high speed. It's completely different than the freezers we have at our houses. If we handle it well, there won't be a big difference with it being frozen. Of course, there would be some small differences compared to frozen ingredients. But it is enough to roast it. In the first place, if it was foie gras that couldn't be roasted, the theme of the mission would be changed to making pâté or cream. And the main reason Jo Minjun chose to roast it was because, in the original future, Kaya also chose to roast it. Jo Minjun still remembered that scene. The scene where she cooked without having eaten nor seen with her own methods. He remembered that difficult challenge. With that dish, Kaya was able to survive. She showed her worth. And he hoped that she would also do it this time. He didn't want her to get disqualified because it was him and not Chloe that was besides her. He had to win. So because of that, Jo Minjun couldn't help but be more serious than Kaya. I promise you. I won't get you disqualified. Whatever you do. I'm not planning to do so. Kaya replied bluntly. Jo Minjun just smiled without saying anything. He got a feeling that he was looking at his little sister Jo Era. He couldn't become a nuisance when he was asked for help. Jo Minjun closed his eyes. The basic form of cooking it was putting pure on top of the roasted foie gras. He thought of tens of recipes for the pure kinds, and the estimated cooking score appeared as much as the recipes he had thought of. 5 points. 4 points. 5 points. 5 points. 6 points. 5 points. 7 points. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 1. End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 27. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 27. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 2. 7 points. That was the best Jo Minjun could get right now. He wouldn't know if he was cooking together with Kaya, but first, he had to share what he had in mind. Jo Minjun said while looking at her. Let's slice it roundly and thickly like a tenderloin and roast it. The method is using aerosol while pouring cooking oil. There's no need to put in olive oil. Because there's abundant oil in the foie gras. Jo Minjun quickly said all of that. Kaya nodded with her mind going blank and nodded. And then she asked. What about the sauce? Jo Minjun slowly ordered things in his mind. The most basic virtue foie gras sauce needed to have was complementing its flavor full of fat. And to complement that, it was necessary to be both sweet and sour at the same time. Jo Minjun opened his mouth. I'm going to make white grape sauce. I'm going to boil down the grape in vermouth, and I'm also going to put a bit of demi-glace sauce. And from this point there are two choices. Is it going to be better to make the demi-glace ourselves? It was a sensitive part. The demi-glace sauce was a sauce to be boiled down when put brown sauce and meat gravy. It could take 30 minutes to make it, but like all dishes that contained gravy, the more you boiled it, the deeper became the flavor. Basically, good quality demi-glace sauces in top restaurants took up to 2 hours, so it was unquestionable that time was essential and important. Were you going to make a handmade demi-glace sauce in 1 hour, no, 50 minutes, or use a commercial sauce? That was the problem that presented in front of them. Because they couldn't know if the handmade sauce was going to be better than the commercial one. Kaya bit her lips as if she was submerged in her thoughts. However, Jo Minjun could vaguely know what she was going to reply. Let's make it. Envidare's smile could be seen in Jo Minjun's face. Right. This is what it means to be a chef. To make every little thing they could with their own hands. To want their hands to be a condiment of the food was what meant to be a chef. You can slowly handle the foie gras. I just saw that it had melted quite a bit. First, let's melt it in the fridge. Because we won't have to even touch it until we have made the sauce and about to do the plating. Okay. I understand. What about the garnish? What about slicing the remaining white grapes and putting it on top? Good for me. As he held a conversation with her, Jo Min-jun felt that it was rather miraculous that he was talking with her. Meeting someone famous from the TV would be like that, but they were similar at the time to cook. Even if it was a famous chef with reputation, while their skills and understanding towards cooking improved, there would be more differences than things in common with other chefs. However, Jo Min-jun and Kaya weren't like that. Of course, they had just started the path to being a chef, but their styles were similar. Suddenly, Jo Min-jun thought of a thing. What if I start to work in the same kitchen as her? Now's not the time to be thinking these things. Sloppy delusions were sufficient even after the mission ended. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. If they say that tagging is difficult, then it should. Who will start? The second person is going to be in charge to make the foie gras. Not even making it, but also the plating. The changes are in intervals of 5 minutes, and there are only 60 minutes. To roast the foie gras and put it in a plate was better if it was done the latest they could. Because there was a need to squash the white grape that was going to be put in the demi-glace sauce the longest time possible. Kaya opened her mouth. She seemed like she wanted to take responsibility. I will do it. Wrapping up. Because in the end, it's my problem. Foie gras, you said you have never made it. Are you going to be okay? You are the same. So I have to challenge myself. And this is something I have to do. As I said before, it's my problem. It's my mistake and my mission. No. It's a team mission. Jo Min-jun replied with a determined voice. Kaya looked at him a little surprised. He seemed like a teacher that was scolding his student, and actually, Jo Min-jun was thinking just like that. He wished that Kaya could understand the reason she entered the disqualifying candidates. He wanted to show her what was the meaning of team missions, and how to work in such circumstances. Actually, Chloe should have been in his place. She could calm Kaya's heart with just her soft and gentle smile. And she could even tell her the meaning of what a team was without even telling her directly. However, Jo Min-jun knew well that he couldn't be like her. What he could do instead of Chloe's warmth was waking her up with words. And fortunately, it seemed like Kaya had understood what he had wanted to tell her. Kaya hesitated a little and in the end, nodded. Okay. I will remember. Good. Jo Min-jun smiled and looked at the clock. Because he was thinking of the concept of the menu, 13 minutes have already passed from the 20 given minutes. 7 minutes. It was too short of a time for them to do something. Awkwardness flowed from both of them. The one who opened her mouth first was Kaya. She questioned him with things she had wanted to ask for some time. Why are you treating me well? I don't think I am, though. No, why? You do. That time with the catfish mission, when you asked me to trade our dishes, and also that time when you said that I was going to win in the interview. Right. It couldn't be said that you did treat me well. But I'm sure that you are favorable towards me. Why? Maybe. Kaya glanced slightly at the camera. She held the mic that was attached to her clothes with her left hand, and with her right hand, grabbed Jo Min-jun's mic. Jo Min-jun was perplexed, so he couldn't say anything in that instant. Kaya opened her mouth. It was a rather serious voice. Do you like me? The reason he couldn't reply instantly wasn't because she had hit the bullseye. It was because he had never thought that he would get that question from Kaya herself. He had also denied it like that in the interview. Jo Min-jun replied with a frozen face. Not at all. Really? Kaya's eyes became sharper. She looked at him for a while and then, talked while smiling. Then keep not liking me. I know you are going to look at me funny when I ask this question. But why can't I? Because I'm like a chic girl. You don't understand the meaning for a white person to grow in a poor house. And there's nothing you would gain if you did know the meaning. I'm sorry, but I already like you. At his words, Kaya frowned. Jo Min-jun felt like he had landed a blow, so he continued speaking while smiling. Not as a girl, but as a chef. But why? Was there something special that I have showed you? You showed me your potential. And also your talent. I was envious. And I also wanted to catch up to you as much as I was envious. It's like that. When you are watching TV and start to cheer for a participant. It could be that I'm cheering for you as a viewer of Grand Chef. But you are not part of the audience, but a participant. At Kaya's words, Jo Min-jun shrugged his shoulders. Won't Messi cheer for Ronaldo at times? Kaya didn't reply. She was looking at Jo Min-jun while shaking. She could really not understand this man called Jo Min-jun. Why could that be? Why was this man more confident and believed in her more than she did in herself? She couldn't know. It was only because Jo Min-jun already knew the future where Kaya became the winner. And Kaya's imagination wasn't as big as to imagine something that was improbable. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. Why don't you let go of your hand? The camera is still recording. Do you want to be edited again? Jo Min-jun let out a sigh and pointed towards the cameraman. The cameraman was all smiles for a while as if he had captured a good scene. Kaya opened the hand that was holding Jo Min-jun's mic. Then she held up her arms as if she was doing a surrendering gesture. I'm sorry, but I thought that it shouldn't have been recorded. That's right, Jo Min-jun looked at the cameraman. And then frowned. There was a microphone clearly attached in the camera. Jo Min-jun asked him. Can this thing record? The cameraman, instead of replying, put a smile. Jo Min-jun mumbled as if it was a pain in the ass. We are ruined. Kaya was looking at the cameraman rigidly. It seemed that she thought that if she blocked the participants' mic, they would be able to be free from being broadcasted. Kaya asked Jo Min-jun. It is going to be broadcasted, right? If it doesn't, then the PD would be an incapable person. And Martin wasn't an incapable man however you looked at him. Kaya said with an annoyed face. I'm already telling you, but the time has ended for you to think of your menus. Now, the participants should bring the ingredients. They say so. I'll be going. Jo Min-jun left Kaya back and moved his feet. She seemed like she was about to say something, but he didn't mind. Whatever it was, only he was going to get more complicated. It was good to not be thinking about anything while cooking. Jo Min-jun mumbled by himself. It seems like she still hasn't understood what being a team means. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, too, end translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 28. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 28. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, 3, Jo Min-jun grumbled and picked the ingredients. White grape, garlic, brown sauce and bill stock made from calf bones. The condiments were tomatoes, tomato paste, red wine, vermouth, salt, etc. When he was bringing the ingredients, almost 2 minutes had passed. Jo Min-jun grated the grapes and poured the vermouth in a bowl. The wine was a liquor made by mixing brandy, medicinal herbs, spices and etc. Vermouth was divided into 2 types. A sweet one just like its name, sweet vermouth, and a sour one called dry vermouth. And there were also another 2 types with other standards. White vermouth and red vermouth. As you could see from the names, it varied depending if it was made with red wine or white wine. What Zhou Minjun was using right now was a sweet vermouth made with white wine. It was to save the color of the white grapes, and at the same time, to save the sweet flavor. There was no need to boil it now. Precisely speaking, he didn't have to. If he had used commercial demi-glace sauce, then he wouldn't have to do all these things. Because he would be done after putting the sauce in the boiling pure. But they were planning to make the demi-glace sauce themselves. When the demi-glace sauce was about to be finished, then you had to start boiling the pure. Of course, they had to finish it before roasting the foie gras. Probably, the one to finish the sauce was going to be Zhou Minjun. It was at that moment when Zhou Minjun was going to handle the garlic. The buzzer rang and Alan's voice resounded. Change. Uncertain actions started to happen at all the countertops. Zhou Minjun put down the knife and moved back. Kaya grabbed the knife and started to handle the garlic very quickly. And after she fried the garlic in the pan, when it was turning brown, she poured the red wine. At that moment, a flame surged up through the pan. Flambe. It was a technique used to send away all of the bad aroma through igniting alcohol in the food. And then, Kaya's hands stopped. It wasn't that she had forgotten what to do next. She had nothing else to do but wait until the sauce boiled down and stir at times. It was when she thought that it was going to be boring. Alan approached her and opened his mouth. What kind of dish are you thinking of making? I'm going to slice the foie gras and roast it, and on top of that I'm going to put white grape pure. It seems like you are going to make the demi-glace sauce that is used in the pure by yourself. Will you be able to finish in time? I'll accomplish it. Kaya replied cheekily. Alan stopped for a moment and looked at her. He couldn't make out if it was because he hadn't tried her dish earlier, or if she was just replying with her original attitude. Because of that, it felt funny for Alan to bring out that incident first. Alan coughed and looked at Zhou Minjun. Thinking about the turn of your tagging, then making the foie gras would be done by Kaya and completing the sauce would be done by you. Yes. Kaya, have you ever made foie gras? No. I haven't even eaten it. Minjun, what about you? Me neither. Precisely speaking, he did eat it. But that was a canned food eaten by French residents. To say that he had eaten it was impudent. Alan said lowly. Don't think of foie gras as normal liver. A swan's liver has more oil and has a deeper flavor than any animal's. And you don't have to take off its aroma, but rather, save it. Please remind this. Yes, I understand. Alan moved away with Zhou Minjun's reply. Kaya glanced at Alan and concentrated again on her dish. He wanted to tell something to that Kaya, but now was the time to be concentrating. Of course, she was only waiting for the sauce to boil down to say that she was concentrating. Kaya, the moment Zhou Minjun opened his mouth, the buzzer rang. Zhou Minjun and Kaya quickly shifted places. Zhou Minjun looked at the pan. The soup had boiled down quite a bit and bubbles were rising. Zhou Minjun asked. Kaya, this is half boiled down, right? Probably. Okay. Zhou Minjun poured the bill stock, calf gravy in the pan. Then, he lowered the fire to the minimum and started to boil it. After that, he took out a new pan and fried the tomato paste. At that time, the buzzer rang again. While Zhou Minjun was backing, he told her. When the tomato paste turns brown, put it immediately in the sauce. Also do it for the spices and the tomatoes. I already know. 15 minutes had already passed. The given time was 60 minutes. They had to use the last 5 minutes to cook the foie gras. So they only had 40 minutes left to finish the sauce. Will it be enough? He wasn't confident. Foods that used the gravy like demi-glace sauce as a base, were all not so delicious. Even masters that had been working for tens of years had to use their own methods to produce their wanted flavor. It was difficult to boast about the quality of a recipe made in the moment at this place. Of course, he did have the help of the system. And the recipe's score was good. 7 points. It was quite an excellent score for a sauce that had to be made in 55 minutes. But if there was even a little bit of a mistake, then a completely different result would come out. He wasn't in a situation where he could relax. Jo Min-jun looked at Kaya. She was putting the tomato paste in the sauce and putting pepper, thyme, and half-sliced tomatoes in the gravy. This was to catch the displeasing smell of the gravy and at the same time save the aroma. Now was really a fight with time. Kaya kept removing the foam that surged from the demi-glace sauce in the remaining time. And then, the buzzer rang. Only 40 minutes were left. BDNVL. Jo Min-jun immediately turned on the fire for the pot that contained the white grapes and the vermouth. The time to complete the pure was around 30 minutes. He had to start right now so he could finish it in time. Can't they make us do a normal team mission? He kept having those thoughts, but honestly, he understood the reason. There were many tables where the participants' movements were not synchronized. It wasn't that they didn't share their cooking method. But as they shared their recipes, there were parts that they would omit as if it was obvious. And in the place of those omitted parts, they would put in their own cooking methods. Of course, those were methods that their partner didn't even think about. In that situation, depending if they respected each other's methods or not, the result would vary greatly. And most of them couldn't help but be persistent with their own methods. Because it was easier to believe in yourself than in another person. However, Kaya and Jo Min-jun were different. But of course, it didn't mean that they threw away their stubbornness and respected the other's method. Their attitude towards cooking were basically similar. From how they handled fire, to how they handled the knife. And Jo Min-jun knew very well the reason for that. Kaya Lotus. It was because of that name. The name Jo Min-jun was most envious of, and wanted to imitate. He saw almost hundreds of videos that showed Kaya cooking. He studied how she approached cooking, and how she cooked. Saying the truth, Kaya was Jo Min-jun's teacher. And at the same time, his mentor. The one who gave him a dream, who was looking at the harsh sides and almost wanted to give up, was her. That's why their cooking couldn't help but be similar. Precisely speaking, it couldn't be helped that Jo Min-jun's cooking resembled Kaya's. Because the one who influenced him on cooking the most was Kaya. All of the favoritism directed at her were because of that reason. And because of that, it was even more so. I can't make her disqualify. She was Jo Min-jun's benefactor. Although it wasn't her intention, the one who introduced Jo Min-jun the world of cooking and made him greedy to walk on that path was her. She was someone who taught him that something like cooking could be splendid, and at times it could be beautiful. It could be said that it was one-sided that he was treating her as his teacher. Jo Min-jun knew really well how she was going to grow as a chef. He knew how valuable of a chef she was. And the proof of that worth was through this program. Kaya gave him a yearning for cooking. Because of an unexpected variable like him, he couldn't make her disqualified that didn't even exist in the first place. Jo Min-jun stirred attentively the two pots with his hands. If it sticked even a little, then the burning scent would fill the sauce. So he could only be attentive. The buzzer rang. Kaya and Jo Min-jun changed places. She was doing the same thing. Removing the foam. Kaya let out a sigh while taking out the foam. I expected this, but it's really a pain. It's a battle against yourself. Jo Min-jun laughed while saying that. She wiped the sweat that was gathered on her forehead and asked. What do you think about the other teams? Are they doing well? I think we are the best in teamwork. Is there something like teamwork? At least we know what we are going to be doing next. Kaya didn't reply. And then, the buzzer rang. 30 minutes passed and 30 minutes were left. Kaya let out a sigh while looking at Jo Min-jun that was stirring with the ladle. I get this feeling that I'm able to take it easy. Anyways, this tagging system is rather good. Because you can rest for 5 minutes. What a surprise. You being optimistic. Did you see me as a pessimistic person? Jo Min-jun started to think at that question. What kind of person was Kaya? The Kaya he looked at the videos was a confident person and full of energy. At least, she was like that after Grand Chef. However, before that, Kaya was really different. She was confident, but that confidence was made up, and there was anxiety hidden somewhere in her heart. Thinking about that, he came up with a response naturally. But you aren't an optimist. How many people in the world are optimistic? If you are not a fool, then it's hard to be it. Kaya said bitterly. That voice made Jo Min-jun curious about Kaya's life. Because even in the broadcast, she just said that her past was rather difficult. So because of that, even Jo Min-jun couldn't know about her in detail. He even remembered what she had told him. You don't know what it means to grow as a white person in a poor house. What could those words mean? He didn't know. He didn't grow up in the US and only saw the bright side of Kaya in the videos. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. He wanted to be a help to her as much as he got hope from her. There's no need to be optimistic. Just believe in yourself. What I said in the interview wasn't bullshit. You are a skilled chef and have talent. So there's no need to be nervous like a newcomer that came for an interview. Honestly, he didn't want to see Kaya being nervous. Competitor. Even if he tried to engrave that word in his head, in the end, she was still his idol and teacher. He wouldn't like to see the dejected shape of that kind of person. Kaya didn't reply. Jo Min-jun couldn't know what she would be thinking by herself. And the buzzer rang 4 more times like that. 50 minutes. The remaining time was 10 minutes. It also meant that he had to finish the sauce soon. Jo Min-jun used the sieve to separate the white grape pure. The thick pulp was left in the sieve, and the pure sat on top of the white demi-glace like white cream. And the next step was simple. He had to mix a spoonful of the demi-glace sauce with pure. That work was seen foolishly and funnily. He had to arduously make the demi-glace sauce, and in the end the amount to be mixed was just 2 spoons. However, he believed that those 2 spoons would become the key to victory. And then, the results he believed in appeared. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 3. End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 29. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 29. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified. 4. White grape pure, freshness. 84% origins. Too many ingredients to show quality. Medium, average ingredients, cooking score. 7 out of 10. It wasn't bad. Taking into account that it was made by Jo Min-jun, it was a really good score. But for Kaya to have helped him on this dish, it was an ordinary score. But the dish wasn't completed yet. Because the foie gras wasn't cooked. Jo Min-jun tasted the pure. The sweet and sour flavors unique of the white grape stimulated his tongue. And what was felt at the end was the flavor of the demi-glace sauce. It wasn't too excessive and you didn't get sick of it. Jo Min-jun turned to look at Kaya. Shall we place the pure in the plate first? Yes. That would be good. Jo Min-jun picked a rectangular plate. Then he poured the pure in a round shape. He didn't forget what Alan had told him. That he was neglecting plating. So he wanted to show that. Jo Min-jun dropped 3 drops of pure in a zigzag shape. Then he pushed the pure to the empty spaces of the dish with the bottom part of the spoon. At first glance, it looked like 3 lines were drawn. The top and bottom lines drawn to the right, and the middle line drawn to the left. He thought that it would be quite good if he placed the 3 pieces of foie gras for the judges. Jo Min-jun looked back again at Kaya. Kaya's eyes were more serious than ever. It was at that time when Jo Min-jun was opening his mouth. Kaya, time is over. This is the last shift. Quickly finish your dishes. Even before Jo Min-jun could say something, the buzzer, together with Alan's voice sounded. Kaya stood in front of the countertop with a frozen expression. And then, took the foie gras. Foie gras, at first glance, looked like chicken breast that was boiled down in beer. The yellowy-brown exterior wasn't as smooth as she had thought. Kaya touched the exterior of the foie gras slightly. It was soft. And when she sliced it, that sensation didn't change. The foie gras, which interior was well thawed, sliced as well as pudding. Kaya started to slice the foie gras. It had the shape of a narrow and thick columns. She placed it in the hot pan. Foie gras was a dish which you had to accumulate fat in the goose's liver. Also it released abundant oil, and the amount it released was enough to fill the pan. When one side of it got seared enough, Kaya flipped the foie gras. Then tilted the pan. The foie gras started to tilt to one side, and the oil started to gather in one place. Then, Kaya used that oil to pour it on the foie gras. It was the arroseur method Jo Min-jun had used previously. The sight of the oil sizzling and boiling was really pleasing to see. The thick aroma that could be felt wasn't nowhere near what they remembered. The aroma was so strong that you could mistake the meat for spices. Jo Min-jun tried to connect the aroma he had never experienced before with something in his mind. But he couldn't do so. It was at the point that there was almost nothing that could be compared to. She placed the seared foie gras on top of the white grape puree. And on top of that was placed the thinly sliced white grapes as decoration. And at that moment, an uncontainable smile could be seen from Jo Min-jun's mouth. Foie gras steak with white grape puree, freshness. 82% origins. Too many ingredients to show quality. Middle, average ingredients, cooking score. 8/10, 8 points. The dish that was half made by him got an 8. It meant that it could be presented in a Michelin restaurant immediately. Jo Min-jun looked at Kaya. Looking at that joyful expression, Kaya couldn't help but frown. What? Why that expression? The food, I think it's made well. What are you? A food Beethoven. To know without eating it. Kaya grumbled like that, but her expression wasn't bad. She too probably knew that the dish was a success. How would she be called a chef if she didn't know how well her dish was cooked? The last buzzer rang. And Joseph opened his mouth. Time is over. Everybody, put your hands off the countertop. It was a quiet voice, but that weight was heavy. Jo Min-jun slightly glanced at his surroundings. They had mostly finished their dishes. Except for one team. That team's foie gras was fried, but the problem wasn't that it was seared, it was burnt. It was as if they didn't have hope in their dishes, but their expressions were dark. What were they going to do about it? If they made a 3-points dish. Even if it was an amateur competition, it was something that shouldn't even be presented in a dish. The rest were all 5 points, excluding Anderson's. Jo Min-jun thought that Anderson's team's dish was going to be an 8, but unexpectedly it was only 7 points. They also made foie gras steak. But thinking about it strategically, you could only cook it as steak. Because pâté or mousse couldn't bring the true flavor of foie gras. You wouldn't know if it was a mission where you only had to give it flavor, but it wasn't good to do so in a foie gras-themed mission. Actually, there were 3 teams out of 5 that had chosen to make it like steak. Of course, excluding Anderson's and Kaya's team, the other one ended up burning the steak. The judges walked towards the team that burnt the foie gras. They were just looking at the dish, and left the countertop without any word. At that cold sight, Jo Min-jun couldn't help but get chills down his spine. The next table the judges went to was Anderson's. It was foie gras steak accompanied with balsamic reduction that was sweet and sour at the same time. The expressions of the judges were quite good. Alan opened his mouth first. It's fine, BVEC, it's qualitative and clean. Anderson. With this dish we could confirm that you are a person who has been taught properly how to cook. Carlos, it's good that you adjusted yourself with Anderson's recipe and cooking methods. But I wonder if your individual work wasn't shown properly. Even so, this dish was delicious. I'll believe in your consideration. Go to the second floor. Going to the second floor meant that you have passed. The evaluation ended like that with Carlos's cheer and Anderson's smile. However, the only time the judge's expressions was bright was only in front of Anderson's dish. For the next 2 tables, the judges only spat malicious words at them. What did you cook? I tried to make foie gras pâté accompanied with a baguette. Hate. This is pâté. Damn, Louis. Just say that this is mousse. Then I would be less angry. Look at this texture. The feeling the pâté gives must be thicker than a creamy feeling and at the same time, feeling of a sausage. But what is this? It's a flavor which I would rather like to eat mustard. I'm sorry. Sorry. Don't be sorry to me. Be sorry for the dish. Oh God. This goose would have never imagined that the purpose it has lived for was to become this poor soil cream. At Alan's words, the participants couldn't say a word. The same was the same for the next table. Emily, who tried a bite of the foie gras with canopy, just sighed. Then asked. This, did you make pâté? At that moment, the participants couldn't reply and hesitated. It seemed that they had remembered the earlier words of Alan. That they had rather replied that it was mousse. Even for them, it looked really greasy and oily. Emily looked at them sharply and said. It seems that you can't even say the name of your dish. It looks like you aren't even worthy to be evaluated. Do you agree? The participants still didn't reply. Leaving behind those participants, the judges approached Kaya and Jo Minjun. Jo Minjun gulped. He already knew that it was well made, but looking at the words thrown at the other participants, he couldn't help but get nervous. And it was the same for Kaya. Her hands were slightly shaking. Joseph opened his mouth. What did you make? It's foie gras steak. We accompanied it with white grape pure. As for the garnish, we placed white grape slices. At Jo Minjun's reply, the judges slowly sliced the foie gras. When they ate a bite, they couldn't think about hiding their amazements and let out admiration sounds. It was really professional and harmonious flavor. It was so well roasted that you wouldn't believe that it was frozen foie gras. Its insides and the outside was filled with a soft fat flavor. But the white grape pure was catching that flavor. If you said that it was white grape pure, then it was basically a sweet and meat flavor. It was easy to think that it wouldn't suit a heavy steak like foie gras, but the demi-glacé sauce prevented that. The role of the demi-glacé sauce was to be a bridge. A bridge located between the pure and the foie gras. The aroma of the pure was preventing the foie gras aroma and the flavor of the pure to play separately. It was a rather calculated flavor. It was almost unbelievable that it was the first time for Jo Minjun and Kaya to cook foie gras. Alan opened his mouth unconsciously. This, incredible. It's really delicious. Personally, I think that this is the best dish I have eaten in this program. The flavor of the pure, and the flavor of the foie gras are all perfect. And they don't even play separately. You have shown a dish that can't get better than this. Thank you. Following Alan, Emily said while laughing. Even if she was containing it, it was a smile that couldn't help but show. The cameraman recorded while smiling, looking at Kaya and Jo Minjun forcing themselves to be calm. They were a pair that were good to see. Joseph said with a soft smile. Kaya, we didn't eat your dish in the previous mission. It was even a good dish, if you didn't take into account that it was a coarse cooking. Now do you know that reason? Will there be anyone who says that they don't in this kind of situation? Kaya replied sharply. That she knew the reason. She couldn't say that she was reflecting on it. But that attitude wasn't any different than saying that she knew the reason. Joseph smiled brightly and said, "Kaya, you are a really talented chef. But no chef can cook alone. Trust in your teammate like now, and have a supporting heart. Then, your cooking will shine even more brightly." Kaya seemed ashamed as to reply something, so she only hit the floor with her heel. Joseph said while looking at Jo Minjun. "I heard that you, Minjun, were the one to think of the sauce, am I right?" "Yes, you are. You said that you have never eaten foie gras, so how could you think of a recipe that suited foie gras?" It was a really sharp question. But it seemed that Jo Minjun had already prepared to get out of that hole. "I have seen it in an image. Foie gras with white grape pure. So are you saying that you depended on that image alone to replicate the flavor?" "Yes." Jo Minjun replied shortly. Joseph looked frustrated at Jo Minjun. What was this youth? To follow the flavor inside of an image. Of course, you could get inspired by the image in the image. However, it was a really picky combination. Be it the demi-glace sauce that connected the foie gras with pure, or thinking about cooking foie gras with the arroseur method. But that Jo Minjun made the recipe. Was it coincidence? Or talent? Saying the truth, he wasn't confident in judging this participant. He was a really peculiar participant. He was a peculiar chef. Excellent. You have good talent, Minjun. In the end, the only thing Joseph could tell him was only that. Jo Minjun replied while smiling. Thank you. After they finished evaluating Jo Minjun, the judges shared their opinions. The debate didn't last long. Even after they sensed it to be a drag, Alan glanced at Kaya and Jo Minjun and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Yes." Alan laughed. "Go to the second floor. Getting help in the face of getting disqualified, for, end translator. Subac proofreader. Mailed.